Present us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favor, and further us with thy continued help, that in all our works begun and continued and ended in thee, we may glorify thy holy name, and finally, by thy mercy, attain everlasting life. Amen. On Thursday, March 14th, 2024, the Deputy Opposition House Leader rose on a point of order, alleging that the member for Lloydminster said in her member statement, quote, "It's a no wonder no one trusts the NDP," end quote. I committed to reviewing the record, and in doing so found many instances of unparliamentary language by members on both sides of the House. In fact, in recent weeks, there have been several instances of members on both sides calling into question the other members' integrity and trustworthiness, contributing to an overall decline in decorum. Members are well aware that it is unparliamentary to impugn the honesty and integrity of their members. Accordingly, I would caution that member and all members to be mindful of the words they use in this chamber, particularly in reference to one another. Introduction of guests. I recognize the Minister of Parks, Culture and Sport.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I request leave for an extended introduction.
Leave has been requested for an extended introduction. Is leave granted? Carried.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, it is my pleasure to welcome 33 members of Saskatchewan's Greek community seated in the Speaker's Gallery here today. Our government is proud to acknowledge the contribution of Saskatchewan's Greek community and the legacy of ancient Greece by recognizing March as Hellenic Heritage Month and March 25th as Greek Independence Day in Saskatchewan. I'd like to recognize a few members who were instrumental in organizing this proclamation, including Spiro Bonus, President of Regina Chapter of American Hellenic Educational Progressive Association and the chairperson of An Evening in Greece 2024. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, it was a sellout crowd on Saturday evening and was well received by everyone here in Regina. Included today, we have Thomas Lyrigris Donis, President of St. Paul's Greek Orthodox Community. We also have Sophia Kalitsis, President of the Regina Chapter of the Daughters of Penelope, Thomas Sirkos, co-founder of Evening in Greece and co-chair of 2024 of the dinner. We also have, Mr. Speaker, since the turn of the 20th century, Saskatchewan's Greek community has made invaluable contributions to our province, our culture, economic and social prosperity. The Greek community also promotes the principles of democracy and freedom that we proudly practice here today. Mr. Speaker, I invite all members to join me in welcoming these special guests to their Legislative Assembly today. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Regina Rosemont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to join with the minister to welcome these leaders in Saskatchewan to their assembly, leaders in the Greek Canadian community, leaders that have been leading for many, many years in this province, contributing to all facets of this province, making their province and this country, their country, a better place. Mr. Speaker, that was on full display on the beautiful evening in Greece this past Saturday. Just a beautiful evening of kindness and celebration and culture. Mr. Speaker, wonderful dance, wonderful food, and so much giving back to this community, Mr. Speaker. I want to identify Dino and his team at the Regina Hospitals Foundation for their leadership as well. And of course, that's where all the dollars were donated. This is a remarkable community, and these are remarkable citizens that have joined us here in their assembly here today. It's wonderful to celebrate the Greek independence and the proclamation on this front, as well as Hellenic Heritage Month, Mr. Speaker. This is something important to all of our province, because of your efforts strengthening this beautiful province. I want to give a special shout out with respect to an evening in Greece to all of the members of that committee, specifically to Spiro Bonus as the chair, and the co-chair Thomas Sirikos, who's joined us here today as well. And just to, again, on behalf of the official opposition, on behalf of a grateful province, thank you for your many contributions to this province.
Recognize the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I also want to join with the member opposite and the Minister of Parks, Culture and Sport in welcoming all of those members from the Greek community, all those members that work so very hard on the Evening in Greece event, but I would say more broadly work so very hard on fundraising for the community in which they live and fundraising for the province. Really, that is the people of this province that are going to be the beneficiary from the 30 years now of Evening in Greece occurring in the city of Regina, Mr. Speaker, and 30 years that these individuals from our Greek community in Saskatchewan have been giving back to their community. Our provincial motto, Mr. Speaker, is from many people's strengths. Most certainly that is true when it comes to those that have blessed Saskatchewan from the country of Greece. So welcome through you and to you, to all members of this Assembly, Mr. Speaker. I want to take the opportunity to welcome each of you, to thank you for giving back to your community, Mr. Speaker, and I hope you enjoy your time in your legislature.
Recognize a member from Regina Walsh Acres.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to join with the Premier and other members of the Assembly to welcome this delegation to the Assembly today. My colleague from Regina Rosemont and I had the opportunity to attend an evening in Greece on Saturday night and was able to have wonderful conversations with many of you. Thank you so much for the work that you do in our communities. It really means a lot to a lot of people. I do want to take a moment to single out two folks who are family friends, of course, Tom and Effie Liagradonis. I had a wonderful pleasure of chatting with you guys the other night at the event. Effie and Tom, of course, have two lovely children who are studying at the U of R. But I do want to just make note of Tom and his long-standing commitment to this city and to this community as a long-standing CPA. A long-time leader in financial services for a number of different organizations in Regina, clearly an influential member of the Greek community, and of course a passionate volunteer on so many fronts, as was demonstrated this weekend at the event. So just wanted to say thank you for all that you guys do, and I ask all members of the Assembly to welcome Tom and Effie and everyone else to their Assembly. Thank you.
Recognize the Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would indeed be remiss if I did not introduce and mention the work done by one Vula Donakis. She's sitting up in your gallery, Mr. Speaker. She has been a tireless advocate for those with varying abilities throughout the province. And in fact, she was probably one of the pioneers. Her husband, who has since passed away, started the Regina Inn, and they have been a feature within the city of Regina for many, many years. So I must say welcome to Vula Donakis and ask all members to join me in welcoming her as well. Thank you.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I'd like to welcome a fairly large delegation of students from here in Regina. These students have come here today from schools around the Regina area like Campbell, Riffle, Laval, La Boldis, Regina Christian, and Winston Knoll.
You're here.
I hope I got them all. I want to thank these students for being here, and of course they're brought here today for lots of reasons and lots of concerns, but they're here, I understand, to show support for their teachers and to ask that this government reconsider the path that they're taking. They're especially concerned about a number of the things that are currently at risk of being impacted through this ongoing 3-month-old negotiation with teachers. They're concerned about things like upcoming trips, athletics. Many of these students are student athletes.
Right.
They're concerned about hoopla. And Mr. Speaker, I want to let them know that as someone who spent 10 years in the classroom, I coached junior basketball, track and field, spent 17 years coaching high school football in this province. I understand their concerns and how important these ventures are to young people, especially those here today who have already had their school experience impacted throughout years of pandemic learning when many of these activities were not available to them. I want to thank these young individuals for being here to witness democracy, for coming here to their assembly to see democracy in action. And I want to encourage them that their voice matters. Their voice matters because this dispute is one phone call away from having those sanctions end. One phone call away from sanctions coming to an end. I ask all members of the Assembly to join me in welcoming these high school students and athletes to their Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear.
Recognize the member from Estevan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to you and through you, it is my honour today to welcome Monique Gofida-Miller back to her Legislative Assembly today. Monique is a tireless advocate for the Queen City and the City of Regina, its proper, and our province of Saskatchewan. Monique has not lived in Saskatchewan for a long time, but she is most certainly leaving Saskatchewan better than she found it. Her and her husband Dean will be moving to Ottawa in the near future, and they will be dearly missed. So please join me in welcoming Monique to her Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to join with the Minister opposite in welcoming Monique Gofida-Miller to her Legislative Assembly. Mr. Speaker, I had opportunity, I believe the week that she moved to the Queen City to introduce her here in her Legislative Assembly. I am sad to say that she is moving on, but will concur with the Minister opposite in saying that she's the kind of person who, when she moves to a new place, which she has had opportunity to do on a number of occasions, she doesn't sit back and wait for things to come to her. She gets involved and makes things happen, Mr. Speaker, and that is exactly the kind of folks that we want to celebrate in our communities, much as the members from the Greek community who have joined us here today again, and the students who are here as well today, Mr. Speaker. I want to welcome Monique to her Legislative Assembly. I hope we see you again here in some capacity, but also want to encourage and celebrate all those in our province who get involved in their communities, who speak out, and who work to make things better. We need to encourage that time and again, Mr. Speaker. I invite all members to join me in welcoming them to their Legislative Assembly.
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join with the member opposite and welcome the young athletes and coaches that are here today. There's one face in particular I recognize, a young man, Zenon Arabko, who, when I coached at North Battleford Comprehensive, Zenon was playing his high school basketball at Unity, and if I remember correctly, I think he terrorized my team a few times and had some pretty big games against the Vikings. So it's great to see him involved coaching here in Regina. I just want to thank all the athletes for coming here to legislature today. High school basketball and really high school athletics are such an important part of the high school experience, whether it's basketball or football or track and field. And so I appreciate these young athletes and coaches coming to our assembly today. I'd ask all members to welcome them to their legislature.
Hear, hear.
Recognize a member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to rise to my feet and give a brief shout out to a student that is here today that is very close to my heart. And I'm sort of reluctant to do this because each one of these students is amazing in their own right, I'm sure. But I know Rosie Magnon, I went out to, hi Rosie, I went out to greet the students earlier and recognized her shining smile. She's a gifted cellist, a baller apparently at Laval, lives part of her life in English, the other part en français. She's the daughter of her proud parents, André Magnon and Erin Canoodla. She's just a wonderful, she's a wonderful kiddo, Mr. Speaker. I had a chance to chat with the kids out there. you know, this is the future of Saskatchewan, and it was eminently clear to me that the future in this province is very bright.
Presenting petitions, I recognize the Minister of Crown Investments Corporation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, residents of the province wish to bring it to the legislature's attention the following. Whereas the Trudeau Liberal NDP coalition carbon tax is one of the main causes of affordability issues and inflation in the nation of Canada, that the federal Liberal NDP government was politically motivated in issuing a carve-out for home heating oil, and that the government of Saskatchewan's decision to not collect or remit the carbon tax on home heating in Saskatchewan has led to a drop in inflation. Further, that despite the decision to not charge the carbon tax on home heating, Saskatchewan families continue to pay that tax out of pocket at the pumps, grocery stores, and more. Mr. Speaker, I will read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows: respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan take the following action: to call upon the Government of Canada to immediately suspend the carbon tax across the nation of Canada and to acknowledge its significant impact on affordability and inflation in Canada. The below undersigned are residents of the City of Yorkton and the surrounding area. I do so present.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon-Meewasin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present our petition calling on the government to address the cost of living crisis. Mr. Speaker, the cost of living crisis is the #1 issue that we hear on the doorsteps. Mr. Speaker, the inflation in Saskatchewan is the highest it has been in 3 decades, and half of Saskatchewan residents say they were living paycheck to paycheck before transportation and food costs skyrocketed in 2022. Mr. Speaker, families in Saskatchewan cite the Sask Party's 32 new tax and fee hikes that are making life more expensive for them. All the while, those tax hikes are also harming struggling industries like tourism, culture, and fitness. Mr. Speaker, while other provinces have acted, the Sask Party government has ignored our calls for a gas price relief plan. Mr. Speaker, I'll read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows: respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to meaningfully address the affordability crisis in Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, the undersigned residents reside in Regina. I do so present.
Hear, hear.
Recognize the member from Regina Alfred Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm again on my feet to present a petition calling on the Sask Party government to open up and make available the approximately 3,000 Sask housing units that are currently not being inhabited, Mr. Speaker. Homelessness is on the rise across communities across Saskatchewan. This Sask Party government has cut the maintenance and renovation budget to these housing units nearly 40% over the last decade. They have not maintained them, Mr. Speaker, and this is contributing to the rising homelessness rates that we see across this province. Homelessness has tremendous costs, not just human costs, financial costs. Every $10 invested towards housing and support of chronically homeless individuals results in a savings of over double that. The recent numbers on what this government is spending on hotels is an example of the expensive approach of crisis management instead of prevention. The prayer reads as follows: we in the undersigned call upon the Government of Saskatchewan to renovate Sask housing units that require renovation, make units available and affordable, and ensure that all the currently vacant Sask housing units are occupied by October 2024. The signatories reside in Regina. I do so present.
Reading and receiving petitions, statements by members. I recognize the member from Cannington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Local solutions for common sense leaders, Mr. Speaker. That's what we heard last week at the 2024 SARM Convention. My colleagues and I had some great discussions with local councillors, reeves, mayors, and representatives from every corner of the province. And while we heard from you about some hard topics and had some frank conversations, our government knows that those are some of the most important conversations you can have as leaders. And our government is incredibly proud of the work being done by Saskatchewan's RMs. Mr. Speaker, in his address to the convention, our Premier delivered great news for our rural municipalities. over $1 billion for further development of the Lake Diefenbaker irrigation project to make sure our producers can keep doing what they do best. And our government is incredibly proud to be committing over $340 million towards revenue sharing. This represents a 167% increase to revenue sharing since our government formed in 2007. Mr. Speaker, your Saskatchewan Party government is proud of the work and the results we've achieved with our municipal partners since we had the honour of forming government. On behalf of the Government of Saskatchewan, thank you to all the attendees for the conversations, ideas and questions, and thank you to the SARM for organizing another great event.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon-Nutana.
I am so fortunate to have my office on Broadway Avenue in the heart of my constituency, surrounded by great local businesses. One of the amazing businesses that opened in the last few years is Beppy's Gelato. Beppy's was created by Paula Christie. She named the shop after her Italian grandfather. Paula was bit by the entrepreneurial bug after being encouraged to start the gelato shop by her husband after a career interruption. She traveled to Bologna, Italy to study at a gelato university where she learned the art of creating gelato. Paula's gelato is made using high-quality, fresh ingredients. Many are sourced locally, including berries she grows and harvests herself, and some that come directly from Italy. She likes to create unique flavors inspired by local ingredients. Beppy's contributes a unique Italian experience to our community and has become a gathering place on warm summer days. It's also been a great place to grab some authentic Italian groceries or an Italian coffee or tea on a wintry day. It's great to live in a community where local businesses continue to thrive and contribute to the economic diversity of our community and the entire city. Congratulations to Paula and her entire staff.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon, Westview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning we received more great news about Saskatchewan's growing economy. Yes. According to StatsCan, investment in building construction numbers continue to see growth in the province. Yeah. Saskatchewan saw an increase of 18.4% year over year from January 2023 to January 2024, ranking third in the nation. This is far above the national average of negative 0.1%. Additionally, we're seeing more homes being built in our province, with month-over-month residential building permits up 2.9%. These positive numbers are the result of the incredible investment we're seeing in the province. In 2023, our province had the second highest private capital investment growth in the country at over $14 billion, and is projected to be #1 in the nation in 2024. This investment is also leading to job creation. Last month alone, the province added 18,700 new full-time jobs. This is all supported by our province's labour market strategy and investment attraction strategy, which serve as our government's roadmap to increasing investment and building our labour force now and into the future. During the NDP's time in government, people and businesses were fleeing our province in record numbers. Fortunately, that is no longer the case, Mr. Speaker, and our government will continue to welcome investment.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon-Newasson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Since being elected, I have met with many arts organizations around the province. While their passion continues to burn bright, arts and culture organizations are raising the alarm and need our support. Performing arts institutions have been specifically hard hit by the pandemic and the years that have followed. Audiences have not returned. Budget allocations to the Saskatchewan Arts Board have not met cost of living for years. And arts institutions continue to reel under the expansion of the PST on entertainment, tickets, memberships during the very time that they are supposed to be recovering. All this has left the arts in Saskatchewan in crisis. While we recognize that the government has made efforts, such as the $200,000 investment in the Regina Symphony Orchestra to ensure that they are not at risk of closure, Mr. Speaker, Band-Aid solutions will continue to be that. Band-Aid solutions. Arts organizations continue to call for even a portion of those PST dollars to be reinvested in the arts, to bring stability back to their operational funding. Mr. Speaker, I would ask all members to join me in calling on the government to make the right decision come budget time. It's time to invest in our province's arts and culture sector, which gives back so much to the people of Saskatchewan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Regina Pasqua.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On March 16th, along with many colleagues, including our Premier, I had the pleasure of attending the 30th Annual Evening in Greece Gala here in Regina. The Greek community has greatly contributed to the culture and economic fabric of our province through business, health, social and charitable causes. And an evening in Greece is a great example, as this year proceeds were donated to the Hospital of Regina Foundation. Mr. Speaker, this event was a fabulous display of culture featuring Hellenic dancing and food and legendary breaking of the plates. The Greek community in Saskatchewan have contributed to the fabric of our communities since before our province's founding. Mr. Speaker, in the early days, Greek people who settled here were often from rural area in Greece where employment was hard to find. These early settlers brought with them a strong sense of pride and patriotism towards their Hellenic identity, which has remained to this day. I do like to thank this year's festival sponsors, organizers, and the many volunteers for their incredible hospitality and great work in putting together this special event. 30 years is a tremendous achievement, and we thank the Greek community for continuing sharing Hellenic culture and supporting our community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Lumsden Morris.
Mr. Speaker, today we were pleased to showcase an event announcing that the governments of Saskatchewan and Canada have signed 2 bilateral funding agreements providing Saskatchewan more than $560 million to invest in healthcare initiatives. Through the Working Together agreement, Saskatchewan will receive close to $391 million to support several priority areas, including improved access to family health services and acute and urgent care across the regions, by supporting a physician payment model, Saskatoon's chronic pain clinic, Healthline 811, and permanent acute care and complex care beds in Regina and Saskatoon hospitals, and to support the health workforce and help to reduce backlogs through recruitment, retention, and training initiatives. Expand the delivery of culturally appropriate mental health and substance use support and specialized care through overdose outreach teams, expanding addiction treatment spaces and rapid grief counseling by Family Services Saskatchewan, among other initiatives, and by continuing investment into modernizing healthcare systems with health data and digital tools. In addition, through the Aging with Dignity Agreement, our province will receive approximately $169.3 million to enhance home and community care services, improve palliative care, and strengthen the quality of long-term care and home care services. Our government also commits to meaningful engagement with Indigenous partners to support improved access to quality and culturally appropriate healthcare services. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Kindersley.
We've heard from the Leader of the Opposition that trust is built when you say the same thing in every room. I'd like to encourage the member to live by her own words, or at minimum tell her caucus what words to use in those rooms. Last week, the member for Saskatoon Fairview was asked about returning taxation power to school boards and said, I quote, "We haven't said that. 100% no," end quote. However, Mr. Speaker, a couple of weeks ago on a local radio station, the Leader of the Opposition was asked specifically if she supported reinstating school division power to tax at the local level, and she wholeheartedly agreed. Mr. Speaker, do you know what the changes we made to education and property taxes have meant to the people of Saskatchewan? It means over $3 billion in savings to property owners across the province. It means students in small towns receive the same education as property-rich cities like Saskatoon and Regina. Now, you know what would happen if we followed the NDP leader's advice? and we went back to the way things were. Just look next door to NDP Manitoba. School divisions were once again given the authority to tax at the local level, and in just the first year, they managed to raise taxes up to 17%. That's what would happen here if the opposition had their way. The NDP rarely come up with any plans or ideas, but when they do, they're bad for students, they're bad for the economy, and they're really bad to the Saskatchewan taxpayer.
Question period. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Now that story time is over, Saskatchewan people today are struggling with inflation, and they're struggling with the rising cost of living. Now, what's driving that inflation, Mr. Speaker? Higher gas prices. From CTV, and I quote, "Economists say that inflation likely flared up again in February amid higher gasoline prices." End the quote. Mr. Speaker, luckily, there is a solve for rising gas prices, lowering gas prices. Why won't this tired and out-of-touch government finally do just that and offer Saskatchewan people some relief at the pumps?
Recognize the Premier.
Without a doubt, Mr. Speaker, identified by the Parliamentary Budget Officer, one of the most significant causes of inflation in across Canada and in Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. It's been the constant and annual increase of the carbon tax on our gasoline, on our groceries, on virtually everything that we consume, Mr. Speaker. Point being said, the CPI dropped almost a full point here in Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker, again identified, I believe, by the Parliament, I think it was Statistics Canada this time, Mr. Speaker, said that the almost point drop in the CPI, or the inflationary measure in Saskatchewan, was due to this government removing the carbon tax from home heating fuel, Mr. Speaker. Can you imagine the drop if we removed the entire 17 cents off of a litre of fuel in the province, Mr. Speaker? The unnecessary carbon tax imposed by the federal government, supported by the NDP, Mr. Speaker, across this nation. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to inflationary issues, inflationary challenges that Saskatchewan families are facing, I've stood on the floor of this Assembly, the Deputy Premier stood on the floor of this Assembly and in the Rotunda, Mr. Speaker, and spoke to the over $2 billion in inflationary measures, in affordability measures, Mr. Speaker, that are present in each and every budget, taking 112,000 people off the provincial tax rolls, Mr. Speaker, allowing us to pay lower taxes, Mr. Speaker, as a whole than we ever did under the New Democratic Party when they had the honour to govern this province, Mr. Speaker. And we're going to continue to do more in months into the future, Mr. Speaker. In fact, you may even see some more initiatives in just a couple of days when the provincial budget is delivered.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, why take the opportunity to do what you can do today when you can point fingers and distract and divide, Mr. Speaker? This is a Premier that is failing today to deliver on the cost of living, and he has completely failed, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to our public finances. Let's look at that Premier's record, Mr. Speaker. When he took over from Brad Wall, Saskatchewan had $17.6 billion in debt. At mid-year, we had over $31 billion, Mr. Speaker. That's nearly double. And there's more debt to come, undoubtedly, on Wednesday. How does the Premier justify doubling Saskatchewan's debt during his short time in office?
Recognize the Premier.
Let's look at Saskatchewan's record, Mr. Speaker, when compared with the rest of Canada when it comes to the capital investments that are being made in this province. Second in the nation today, Mr. Speaker, up 25%, projected to go up another 14% this next year, Mr. Speaker, which will put us first across the nation. Let's look at our record when it comes to exports. Announced the other day, exports are up to the country of India, $20 billion in ag exports, Mr. Speaker, achieving our growth plan target. Part of our $50 billion in exports, which is a record number from the province of Saskatchewan, exporting $50 billion of product to over 150 countries around the world, Mr. Speaker. Let's look at the nearly 20,000 jobs that were brought to light by the communities and businesses operating in those communities right across the province just this past year. Mr. Speaker, in a couple of days, we're going to see the provincial budget delivered by this Deputy Premier, Mr. Speaker. You're going to see what the strength of an economy can do when it comes to investments in our classrooms, investments in care, and investments in our communities, Mr. Speaker, most certainly providing for a brighter future for Saskatchewan residents.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
The bluster as usual, Mr. Speaker, but this Premier is on track to double Saskatchewan's debt. That is his record. He's added $14 billion to the debt since he became Premier. Mr. Speaker, they won't want to hear that, but that is more than Grant Devine. Mr. Speaker, we'll remember Grant Devine as the Conservative Premier who nearly bankrupted this province. But this Premier, Mr. Speaker, this Premier is in a league of his own. How does the Premier feel about the fact that he's added more debt to Saskatchewan people than Grant Devine?
Recognize the Premier.
Speaker, the measure that provinces use and the federal government uses, Mr. Speaker, the federal NDP Liberal coalition government uses is net debt to GDP. Where we are in this province, Mr. Speaker, is second lowest in the nation when it comes to our net debt to GDP, Mr. Speaker. This is what a strong and growing economy is able to bring the people of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker, is the second lowest net debt to GDP in the nation of Canada. All the while, Mr. Speaker, unlike a time in this province when there was 176 schools closed, over 400 teachers laid off across the province. We are building schools, Mr. Speaker, and I dare say you might see a few more in just 2 days when the Deputy Premier rises to her feet, Mr. Speaker. Unlike the members opposite that were firing nurses, firing doctors, and closed 52 hospitals in this province, Mr. Speaker, we are building hospitals, replacing hospitals, most notably, I would say, the Saskatchewan Hospital in North Battleford and the Jim Pattison Children's Hospital in the city of Saskatoon, Mr. Speaker. We are providing, as they would have learned just last week, Mr. Speaker, record funding to municipalities, Mr. Speaker, and we are building highways as opposed to encouraging communities to go out in a community building project and fix their own highways, Mr. Speaker, which is the way it was under the NDP. Mr. Speaker, what you are going to see through the strength of a growing economy in this province is in 2 days is a provincial budget delivered by this Deputy Premier, which is going to show what that can do in the way of investing in our classrooms, and what that can do in the way of investing in care in this province, Mr. Speaker, and what that can do in the way of investing in our Saskatchewan communities.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
I'll give him this, Mr. Speaker. It's some bold for him to try to stand up there and brag about his record on education and so much more. But, Mr. Speaker, as a former Premier used to say, the best predictor of future behaviour is past behaviour. So what does this Premier's record have us to believe will be contained in the budget on Wednesday? We can expect record levels of debt and a projected surplus, Mr. Speaker, that will sometime in the future surely turn into a deficit. Because, Mr. Speaker, that's what we saw just last year from that government. $1 billion surplus that turned into a $250 million deficit. And with hundreds of millions of dollars in extra spending, Mr. Speaker, it's fair to say that that government blew their budget by $2 billion. Mr. Speaker, when will that government, that Premier, accept any responsibility for his incompetent management of our public finances?
Recognize the Premier.
Day after day, we see this alternate reality standing up, Mr. Speaker, before us in the opposition members, Mr. Speaker, where they member after member ask for us to remove this tax, remove that tax, remove that tax, invest more here, spend more there, Mr. Speaker, and all the while they're going to say that why isn't the budget balanced in the province, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker. A wise member that served as the Minister of Agriculture on this side, Mr. Speaker, he was our first Minister of Agriculture in 2007, once said, when you're in opposition, you can say whatever you want because nobody's going to take you to account. Mr. Speaker, when you're in government, you have to make serious decisions on behalf of the people that we represent across this province, Mr. Speaker, serious decisions that involve
$3 billion. Is it a competition over there? Who can talk the loudest?
creating an environment, Mr. Speaker, where our economy can grow and prosper, so that we can take the proceeds of that strong economy, Mr. Speaker, and invest them in our classrooms, invest them in care, and invest them, Mr. Speaker, in our communities from corner to corner to corner to corner in the province of Saskatchewan.
Recognize the member from Regina Rosebar.
Mr. Speaker, that Premier has added more debt than any Premier in Saskatchewan's history. And in his response, he chose to remind us that he also brought about the biggest tax hike in Saskatchewan's history, Mr. Speaker. This tired and out-of-touch government has wasted public dollars hand over fist. From the GTH to the bypass to sweetheart deals with donors and insiders, that's that Premier's record. How does that Premier defend his legacy of debt, including the fact he's added more debt than Grant Devine?
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very curious how the members opposite would even begin to fund their promises, because they have no plan. They criticize, but they have no plan. In order to forego the fuel tax, what tax would they increase to backfill it? Because that tax goes towards repairing the roads. Would we have to go back to repairing our own roads because they forego that revenue? That money that is borrowed is building hospitals, Mr. Speaker, something that never happened under the NDP. The NDP closed hospitals, laid off nurses and doctors. Mr. Speaker, that borrowing is going towards building schools, Mr. Speaker, a record number of schools, Mr. Speaker. Under the NDP, schools were closed, teachers and support staff were laid off. Mr. Speaker, it does not make any sense for that member opposite to stand when their record was so abysmal. The only thing they decreased when they were in government was the population of Saskatchewan.
Recognize the member from Regina Rosebar.
Mr. Speaker, as we pointed out today, the premiers of the NDP in the past, they decreased debt, Mr. Speaker, unlike that premier and this other Sask Party premier, and of course Grant Devine. We're talking about that Sask Party government's record, and the worst part, for all that big spending, they sure don't have the results to show for it. We have the longest waits for hip and knee replacements in Canada. Women have to go to Calgary to a Sask Party donor to get a mammogram at 10 times the cost. Cash-strapped families are left behind with no relief at the pumps. Education is at a breaking point. Yet this tired and out-of-touch government has added more debt than any other Saskatchewan premier. And when it comes to delivering for people, they're dead last on results. How does the Sask Party and that premier defend this indefensible record?
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, it is easy to defend when you look at the new schools across our province. It's easy to defend when you look at the new hospitals we've built. It's easy to defend when you look at the new long-term care homes that we've built. It's easy to defend when you see that highways are actually being repaired now instead of going to pothole abysmal state of affairs that they were under the NDP. Mr. Speaker, what hospital would they not have built? What school would they not have built? They need to now stand up and say, we wouldn't have spent that money, Mr. Speaker. We don't think that school is necessary. We wouldn't have spent that money because we don't think a hospital is necessary. We don't think we'd spend the money. We have a growing province. We need more people to be hooked up to power and energy, but we wouldn't hook them up. We just leave them out in the cold, Mr. Speaker, because we're not going to allow our crowns to borrow money for infrastructure.
Recognize the member from Regina Rosebar.
Mr. Speaker, the list of waste and mismanagement and scandal from that government is long. They've wasted money hand over fist, day in, day out, from sunrise to sunset. Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan people know it. They talk a big game about balancing the budget. Of course, they couldn't balance the budget, so instead they had to scrap their balanced budget legislation. And of course, this premier has balanced only one budget, and that one was a bit of a fluke year. The last budget has gone from $1 billion surplus to $1 billion deficit, a $2 billion miss on the budget, Mr. Speaker. Saskatchewan people deserve better performance, and they deserve the straight goods, Mr. Speaker. Why won't the Finance Minister come clean and release the third quarter financial report instead of burying the deficit and their wild mismanagement in the back pages of the budget on Wednesday?
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Two more sleeps, Mr. Speaker, and he will see the budget and he will see the third quarter and he will have all of his curiosity answered. Quite frankly, unlike the public or the people of Saskatchewan who will have to wait patiently for a long, long time to ever figure out what the plan is of the NDP, what they would close or what they would increase in taxation in order to cover the cost of their promises. They can say a lot, Mr. Speaker, but they have yet to be forthright and let the public know how they would pay for their plan. How would they pay for their promises? How would they pay for their $3 billion worth of items and extra spending that they said they would do without one single idea of what they would do to pay for it? Because someone's got to pay for it or else they got to borrow it. It's one or the other. So what is the NDP plan? Because that's what's buried and that's what the public doesn't know.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, you'd think that with the record debt under this Premier's watch that we'd be leading the nation when it comes to education funding, but that's not the case. Instead, we've seen per-student funding under this tired and out-of-touch government fall from first in Canada to one of the last. It's why teachers are taking job action. It's why teachers will be here on Wednesday instead of in the classroom. Why won't the Minister of Education do his job and finally get a deal that addresses class size and complexity?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to let the member know that we do lead the nation in education funding. When it comes to per capita funding into K-12 education, Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan has led the country among all provinces for multiple years, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, why is that, Mr. Speaker? We have increased school operating funding, Mr. Speaker, every year. We've got another school operating funding increase coming on Wednesday, Mr. Speaker. But we've also invested significantly into capital around the province. $2.4 billion over the last 15 years into school capital, Mr. Speaker. 60 new schools, 30 major renovations, Mr. Speaker. I'm looking forward to Wednesday to talking about more capital investment coming to schools in Saskatchewan.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, this impasse continues only because of this tired and out-of-touch government's refusal to bargain in good faith. Hoopla cancelled, Mr. Speaker. That's on them. And the students who are here today need this government to change their course and find a path through. Teachers and students deserve so much better than the smarm offensive that this minister brings to his job each and every day. Mr. Speaker, the only path out of this is a deal that addresses class size and complexity. If the minister won't negotiate that with teachers, why won't he send just those issues to an independent arbitrator to decide? If he does that, sanctions will end today.
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, as a former player, a former referee, a former coach myself, I understand well the hard work that has gone in across the province by teachers, by coaches, by players, all across the province, Mr. Speaker. But you know, Mr. Speaker, you know what's unfortunate is now that the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation leadership have decided to target the hard work of those coaches and athletes around the province by threatening to cancel Hoopla this year, Mr. Speaker. That is incredibly disappointing. Mr. Speaker, I don't think it's acceptable for the union leadership to cancel something that students have spent thousands of hours on when they've only been at the bargaining table for 30 minutes in the last 5 months, Mr. Speaker. Actions speak louder than words, Mr. Speaker. Government has brought a renewed mandate to the table, tried to bring forward solutions, Mr. Speaker. It's time for the STF leadership to stop looking for excuses and get back to the bargaining table.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, if that minister worked half as hard as those athletes up there, we would have a deal already. Mr. Speaker, we're at an impasse. Teachers won't budge on their demands for a deal that addresses class size and complexity, and the minister won't budge from his demands and his refusal to negotiate. There's no path forward under the Sask Party status quo. It's time for that minister to get out of the way, for an independent arbitrator to come up with a solution that works for both sides. Does the minister realize that he is the problem? Why would he agree to settle this dispute with teachers through binding arbitration so that sanctions can end today?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, when I was a coach, I made it clear to my team that I expected them to play for a full 40 minutes. You can't win the game unless you play for a full 40 minutes. Right. But, Mr. Speaker, instead, what we've seen from the union leadership, they haven't even played a full game, Mr. Speaker. They've been at the bargaining table for 30 minutes over 5 months, Mr. Speaker. And now the union leadership is choosing to target the hard work of students and coaches all across the province by threatening to cancel hoopla, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me just remind the members opposite about the government's actions over the last 5 months. While the STF leadership have not been coming to the table, Mr. Speaker, we've come forward with annualization of pilot projects and class size and composition funding, Mr. Speaker. Enhancements to classroom safety, Mr. Speaker. Government has come forward with a renewed mandate on, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to salary, we are not going to do 23.4% over 4 years, Mr. Speaker, but we have offered a healthy salary increase to the teachers who do important work in our province, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these are the actions that government has done. It is time for the union leadership to come back to the table.
Recognize the member from Regina Walsh Acres.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This tired and out-of-touch government is allergic to transparency, Mr. Speaker. They're keeping the size of the deficit under wraps, and they're keeping the Medical Services Branch statistical report under wraps, too. This report shows how many doctors and specialists are working in Saskatchewan. Now, normally, this gets posted online, but the Sask Party is refusing to release it until after the session is over. How does the Minister of Health justify this total disregard for basic transparency?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have the Ministry of Health Medical Services Branch Annual Statistical Report for 2022-2023 available today, which we'll table here in the Assembly today. Mr. Speaker, what the report highlights, Mr. Speaker, is that the number of licensed physicians in Saskatchewan over the past 5 years, the number of licensed physicians has grown in the province of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. In the number of active physicians, Mr. Speaker, there's been an increase over the past 5 years in the number of active physicians practicing in Saskatchewan. In the area of active rural general practitioners, Mr. Speaker, more active rural GPs in rural Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. In the area of active specialists, that has grown to 926, Mr. Speaker, also an increase over the past 5 years in the number of specialists here in our great province, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from the Regina Stone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, when the Sask Party refused to release the third quarter financial report, we FOI'd it. When the Sask Party refused to release the Medical Services Branch, we FOI'd it. Good to see the Minister of Health change his position here today on that. Finally. The Sask Party denied both requests by relying on a loophole that says government doesn't need to release a record if it's being published within 90 days. The Independent Information and Privacy Commissioner recommended back in 2016 that this loophole be closed and that it be decreased to 20 days. If that had happened, the public would have the records. Why won't the Minister of Justice close the loophole and fix our broken Freedom of Information system? Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in 22-23, government institutions processed 1,534 access requests for general information, and where records existed, which is in 872 cases, access was granted in full or in part 96% of the time, Mr. Speaker. Saskatchewan has a short wait time Relatively speaking, for FOI requests, an average of 20 days. It maintains the lowest percentage of FOI requests that require over 30 days to complete at 16%. Applications granted, partially or in full, increased to 832 in 22-23 as stated, compared to 268 in 2018-19, Mr. Speaker. That is a 210% increase.
Hear, hear. Recognize a member from Saskatoon Centre.
Mr. Speaker, hundreds of people have died from overdose in Saskatchewan. Last year, we set a new record with 476 deaths. The crisis has claimed the lives of almost 2,000 people since 2018, and a disproportionate number of the people we are losing are First Nation and Métis people. When will the Sask Party stop the harm and come up with an evidence-based plan to address overdoses and save lives?
Recognize the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the question. Mr. Speaker, as I've said many times in this House, our government has a plan, and that plan is focused on treatment and recovery so that we can help individuals who are battling addiction overcome their addiction and live healthy lives in recovery. To that end, Mr. Speaker, we have announced more than 183 new addiction treatment spaces across Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, we have 15 new spaces at the Thorpe Recovery Centre in Lloydminster. We have 60 new spaces coming in Lumsden, Mr. Speaker. 14 new spaces at the former Drumming Hill facility in North Battleford, now operating as Poundmakers Lodge. Mr. Speaker, we have 32 spaces through Possibilities Recovery Centre in Saskatoon, 26 addictions treatment spaces at St. Joseph's Addiction Recovery Centre in Estevan, Mr. Speaker, and we have 36 virtual spaces offered by EHN across the province, Mr. Speaker, so that every individual in this province has easy access to addictions treatment spaces. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ministerial statements, introduction of bills, presenting reports by standing and special committees, orders of the day. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In order to facilitate the work of committee this afternoon and this evening, I move that this House do now adjourn.
Government House Leaders move to adjourn the House. As a pleasure of Assembly to adopt the motion. This House now stands adjourned till 1:30 tomorrow.